Generating traffic and sales can be a challenge for online merchants. But selling on the Walmart Marketplace puts your products in front of millions of customers who shop on Walmart.com. And right now, sellers who join Walmart Marketplace can save up to 50% on referral and fulfillment fees for the first 90 days. So get started today. Head over to marketplace.walmart.com/savings. That's marketplace.walmart.com/savings. Welcome to Ecommerce Conversations, a weekly podcast from Practical E-commerce, hosted by entrepreneur Eric Bandholz.
What is going on, Internet? Eric Bandholz back again with another amazing episode of E-commerce Conversations. Hope all is going well on the other side of the Internet. On the other side of the Internet from me, Alex. What's up?
What's up, Eric? Awesome to be here with you.
Yeah. I got to bring the energy right before the holiday
Always.
season. You're wearing your Black Friday, Cyber Monday hat.
Yep, it's flames.
Yeah, do you guys, is the house on fire, like that kind of flames, or sales are on fire?
Hopefully none of the former and all of the latter.
Okay.
These are flames for our customers, flames for all the text messages that are going out, and hopefully flames for a record-setting holiday season.
Yeah. Has it been a good year for you guys?
It has been a good year for us. Really what's been going on in our world is Postscript's business is a reflection of the Shopify ecosystem. Right? We only work with brands built on Shopify. So we've felt a lot of what different brands have felt this year, right? Headwinds in different months or different quarters, but we've still seen a lot of growth just in terms of more brands adopting Postscript and more people coming on. It feels like 2023 is the year that we really carved out our niche in the market. And so it's been a good year. It's been challenging, but honestly, as I reflect with my co-founders, every year's been challenging. That part doesn't really change. It's just the shape of it evolves a bit. But yeah, it's been a good year.
What is that niche that you've carved out?
So I think that we are more and more being seen as the best SMS platform for brands built on top of Shopify. And I think that over the last few years, there's been lots of different players in the space. And it wasn't clear if there was going to be one leader. And I certainly think early on, Attentive really led and they opened up the market in the beginning. And I think they were the leaders there. And I think what shifted this year is just larger and larger brands have wanted a partner that's dedicated to being best in class at this one thing. So we don't work with any other platforms. We don't do email. We don't do any of these other things. We're best in class for SMS on Shopify. And that means best in class product, best in class team, best in class strategy that we help people with. And this was the year that it really seemed to resonate. And so, Klaviyo is still a really big player who we've got a ton of respect for. That's a great option for brands that want an all-in-one experience. Attentive's still a big player. We've got a lot of respect for them. They're focused, I think, broadly outside of Shopify as well. And with Postscript, we've just seen more and more brands coming to us. A lot of the brands within the Twitter zeitgeist of the Ridges of the world and the, Brooklinens of the world and the Thrive Cosmetics of the world, True Classic. They've moved to Postscript recently. I'm just looking for those superior results. That's what I think we bring.
Yeah, you kind of mentioned Twitter. I won't dig much into that because I wanted to pick your brain a little bit about what you talked about earlier, and that you get a pretty good snapshot as to what's going on in the industry abroad. Can you walk me through a little bit more about what you're seeing? Is it purely based on SMS send rates that you're able to do that? Or do you guys also get insights into conversions and sales? And
yeah, so we get insights into conversions and sales because the way that our platform is built for a marketer or a brand to make the most of SMS, they want SMS connected to their order data and their conversion data. So all that gets fed into Postscript from Shopify. And it's anonymized when we look at it across our customer base. But at this point, there's 12,000 brands that use Postscript, varying in size. And so that's not nearly all of Shopify's customer base, but it's a nice little snapshot of it. And what we've seen this year is interesting inconsistencies. So on one hand, the headwinds certainly seemed present. We've seen more brands go out of business this year. than prior years. We saw people close up shop at a higher rate,
Was that
really
like,
across the
was it across all 12 months that they're going out of business, or was there like waves, where they,
less so the last few months, but certainly in the first 3 quarters, we saw it like consistently happening. We saw an uptick. We also saw growth in aggregate slow down a lot. Like the last few years were like very high year-over-year growth percentages, and this year growth seemed much, much smaller. A lot of brands were closer to flat. But what didn't happen is e-commerce did not like fall off a cliff. This felt like a little bit of a retrenching, but a lot of the businesses that we work with that were like healthier to begin with, they're continuing on to have good years, just probably lower growth, maybe closer to flat. But it seems like the pendulum has just swung from like being able to raise money or get access to capital, growth at all costs, to what are the more durable businesses and can they grow sustainably? And so that was also in the conversation within e-commerce this year and some of those themes, but that's also what we saw within our customer base, where like the big durable businesses, they didn't suddenly disappear,
right?
but their growth rate probably slowed as they, moved how they were managing to a more efficient spend and structure.
Approximately what percentage of companies did you see go out of business, and how does that compare like year over year?
I mean, we're talking like low single digits. We're not talking suddenly a rise of where like 10% of our customer base went out of business. I think low single digits, and I don't have the specific math, but I just know anecdotally from watching like different tickets come into our system, there was certainly an uptick this year of folks just closing up shop. And I think that was more concentrated in like the, entrepreneur part of the market, the like smaller SMB people just getting off the ground. I think that hitting escape velocity with a brand is just harder now than it was 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah, and I feel like, from what I talk about with other founders, like historically Postscript has been like the smaller e-commerce company, supportive to the smaller brands. And obviously as you grow, some of those brands become larger, like Ridge. Is that still a pretty strong part of your business? Is the smaller brands doing, under $1 million or, a couple $1 million a year?
Yeah. So we still see a lot of those customers come in. We're thrilled to have them. We have like a pretty strong self-service product. But to be frank, over the last few years, our business has evolved. We've just gotten pulled up market. And so like, I think that's because some customers that we had that started small grew and wanted us to grow with them. But also just organically, as larger brands were looking to optimize their results, they like ended up coming to Postscript. And so I mentioned some earlier, but really the story of the last couple of years for us has been like a pretty meaningful maturation of our business and our ICP, our ideal customer profile, and like where a lot of our resources go to servicing, where now we are very much focused on larger brands. And so that shows up, right? Like I mentioned, like True Classic joined us this year. Jones Road Beauty migrated to us this year. Ridge migrated to us this year. And Lomi, right? There's like lots and lots of examples of 8 and 9 figure brands that use Postscript, Dr. Squatch and Ruggable and all kinds of folks. And so when I reflect about like what our sweet spot is right now, really, I think we are the best partner out there for anyone like doing $5 million annually and above. And if you're below that, can you use Postscript and have a good experience? Totally. We started off as a self-serve product. It's built for that, but we put the effort in to ensure that like the deliverability systems are robust enough, but also the service infrastructure is robust enough to take care of those larger brands too.
Yeah. One thing we were talking about before hitting record was, I'm dealing with like an ADA lawsuit right now. Within your industry, Florida has, I guess, when did they pass the bill? And what are the nuances of sending to Florida customers that operators should be aware of?
Yeah. So in general, there is a bunch of compliance rules in the SMS landscape. There's a few different tiers. So one is like governmental regulation, right? That creates legal risk for brands. And the other is carrier regulation, the carriers being like T-Mobile and Verizon, the people who actually deliver the messages. And so there's all kinds of carrier rules and regulation. Those don't create legal liability for a brand, but they create like deliverability risk, right? So like if a brand is breaking those compliance rules, Verizon might shut their phone number off suddenly one day. And, those sorts of institutions, they can be pretty leaned into like protecting their airwaves. And so they aren't going to be like the most flexible dealing with like an appeal from a small, medium-sized business. So there's compliance regulation, and then there's also the legal regulation. And this happens at both the federal level through something called the TCPA, the Telephone Consumer Protection Act. And then there is at the local level too, at the state level. And so historically, the TCPA existed. And the TCPA had to do with things like making sure you never texted anyone who didn't explicitly opt in, making sure you didn't text anyone who had opted out, etc. What's new that you pointed to is state level regulations. And these have been popping up over the last few years. Florida is like the most famous for this, but it's also happening in places like Oklahoma. There's been a couple other states that their local legislatures are like entertaining these sorts of acts. And it introduces new risk for brands. And a lot of what this risk has to do with is around when you are sending to people or ensuring an even higher threshold of opt-in in order to send to them. And so the approach that we've taken is to just continue to upgrade the like underlying compliance of the Postscript platform so that brands hopefully like don't have to worry about updating their, TOS and things like that, or updating where they're capturing opt-ins. We've baked new functionality into the platform so that people don't have to worry about like, oh, I need to carve out my Florida customers right now. That all happens automatically. But the local state regulations, I think, have triggered, unfortunately, like a groundswell of ambulance chasing lawsuits. It's not really what the law was intended to do. And so there is an effort right now across several different states going on to try to get some of these legislation regulation changed, because the intention of the law was to try to like protect consumers from marketing. It wasn't trying, or from like non-compliant marketing. It wasn't trying to open up this avenue for these ambulance chasing lawsuits like we've seen. So we approach it by stuff into the product and also having like an in-house legal effort to help brands if they encounter one of these chasers.
Yeah. So, I mean, like, what are the specifics that they should be aware of? Like, you can't send to people in Florida after like 5 p.m. or something like that? Or do you know off the top of your head what they're...
Sure.
And then how are they able to identify people who are, quote unquote, violating these regulations?
Sure. So there's a couple key pieces of the Florida legislation to use that as an example, because that's the one with the most volume right now. So the first is there's longer quiet hours for subscribers that are in Florida. What this means is that like for recipients, if their local time zone's in Florida, quiet hours begin at 8 p.m. and at 8 a.m. So that's like a 12-hour quiet hour window. There's also like new limitations on quiet hour messages. And then there's lastly, limit of 3 messages within 24 hours for a specific campaign or product. And so those are all like additional state level regulations in Florida that don't exist at the federal level. And they essentially apply to, they're a couple years old now. It took a while to ramp up. And they apply to any brand either like headquartered in Florida, or if they just have significant operations in Florida, which is obviously like open to some interpretation. But the penalties for them are meaningful. It's $500 to $1,500 per message. So that's some of the like specific regulation and risk that it creates down there.
Per like person who received it? Like, or like, so if I have 100 people in Florida and I send a message out at 10 o'clock at night, would that be 100 times 500? So what is that, $50,000?
So that would be the liability it creates. However, there's some like asterisks along the way to reduce that. First, the way that this would get caught is maybe a normal consumer would get it and be upset and start researching laws and reach out to a lawyer. What's more common actually is that there are like known plaintiffs who are out there who've learned about this and who are like constantly buying like deactivated numbers and like old numbers to try to get texts that they didn't sign up for, or to get a text like outside of a waking hour because someone isn't following the regulation. And so these plaintiffs, they'd partner up with, an ambulance chasing style of law firm. And what they're going to try to do is they're going to try to get it certified as a class action. Because if they can get it certified as a class action, and if they can then like network their way or find their way to everyone else who received that text, that's when the liability and the like prize money goes up, because it really is capped on a per subscriber, per message level. However, there's like several different things brands can do. So the best practice that we articulate, right, is not only within Postscript, like for any Florida-based phone numbers. For example, we don't let like automation messages go out to them during that period. We hold it till like 8 a.m. in Florida the next morning, right? So we just like remove that risk from happening. But another thing we do is we advocate that people have like special terms within their dynamic like terms of service that we host for them that has like a class action waiver. So pretty much like when the subscriber opts in, they're agreeing to like not take place in a class action suit later on. And that's also something that would like limit the liability for a brand if a message goes out errantly and would like cap it at the $500 to $1,500 amount.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the problem is like, let's say I have a customer, they move, they no longer keep their Florida number, and then someone else, because T-Mobile is like recycling these numbers all the time.
Yep.
So like, how do you ensure that your data is up to date? Do you have to send out like reconfirm this is your number like every year, or stay subscribed if you really want to be compliant? Like, because if they are trying to get recycled phone numbers, like that's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
You can't avoid that.
Totally. It's a bit of a whack-a-mole. So like one thing that we do is we actually pay to get access to deactivated and like change phone number logs. And then we like remove them from our customers' lists automatically. That's just like something that happens in the background, for example.
Do you say that like in your marketing?
Probably if someone's quizzing us on our compliance efforts. But in general, what we found is that like the market wants us to know that we're on top of compliance, but they don't want to understand the details.
Yeah.
And so we haven't like gone down that route, right? We haven't shared that we like haven't, like I was shared with you earlier, we haven't shared really or talked about that we have like an active lobbying effort in Florida, which like isn't really affecting our bank balance. It's like trying to protect our customers from these stupid lawsuits, but maybe it's something that would resonate.
Well, I mean, like from my perspective as an e-commerce person who wants to like kind of understand, it's easy to say we're the best, right? We're the best SMS for, Shopify platforms, whatever. It's like, well, everyone's going to say that like that.
Sure.
So it's like what we do is we proactively, get is it public information, or do you have to pay for it, or like
you have to pay for it?
Yeah. So like we invest in, is it monthly, like every month, or was it?
I don't know the cadence. I think it's probably even faster than that, but I'm not sure. I mean, but yeah, we invest there. We have like a bunch of like litigators that are on our team full time working on the SMS stuff.
Yeah.
We have a product design and engineering team that focuses on compliance. It's like a major investment area of the company to try to stay ahead of all these different state and local regulations.
Yeah. So, I mean, I just think about like, from my perspective, like knowing how you do it, like takes a little bit of like, here's the risk, like here's a risk. Somebody changes their phone number and then this phone number is recycled, and these plane trolls are trying to get these phone numbers to go after you. And, like because we have database where we can clear those datas out. I don't know. It just seems like a very compelling, reason to go after for brands like me who have been sued recently over like ADA trolls and like understand that the actual risk, and because you're not growing your business at all the minute you start working on a lawsuit. Like there's no value at all in business.
Totally. So it's a waste of time. It's a time drain. Yeah, no, it's a good call. I appreciate it.
But again, like I think that the average consumer or average e-com consumer is probably like, how do I sell more? Right. It's like, how do I get better delivery rates? Or
it's true. It's like, it's that way to your point until they get sued once. And then every time in the future, that's definitely on their hit list.
So, like you talk about being best in class SMS, everyone else seems to be moving towards this like all-in-one, more features. Do you feel like there's limitations to how your company can grow by only doing SMS, or what is the long-term vision for the brand?
So I think the answer to that really depends on just how good we are, right? Like what I've learned about in the space is that if we go to a brand and we say, hey, we're best in class, but they only see like a 3% improvement over an alternative, that's not going to work. But if I say, hey, like we're best in class, we're focused on this, and they see 50% better results, then that'll probably really resonate in our market. And so we tend to think that it's still very, very, very early days for SMS. And so what we're working on is trying to improve performance across the whole customer journey. So we frame the approach to Postscript in terms of a thing called subscriber LTV. It's like, what is the lifetime value of each SMS subscriber, right? Of each phone number you capture. And then also, how big is your list? Because those two things together, like that makes up the total value of an SMS program. And so if we can drive innovation attacking either one of those things and improving either one of those things that's different than what the rest of the market offers, then our customers win and we win. So for example, on the list growth side of things, tomorrow, Thursday, December 14th, we're launching a new opt-in mechanism called on-site opt-in. We're super excited about it. A bunch of brands have been beta testing it. They see meaningful lifts in list growth between 30% and 100% compared to double opt-in forms, compared to the like two-touch forms that are common. It keeps people on site, so it doesn't take them off site to opt in, drives more opt-ins. It's an awesome format. That launches tomorrow, and like that's a great example of an innovation that no one else has right now. It's SMS focused. It helps people grow their lists way faster. We've learned that the market really values stuff like that. On the marketing side of things, our flow builder has all kinds of like conversational tech to allow back and forth conversations to happen, because we've learned that when a subscriber responds back, they're more likely to buy, they're less likely to unsubscribe over time. That's like a key insight that we've then built into the product too. Another example is that we bought this company 6 months ago called Fondue. Fondue provides a cashback alternative to coupon codes. They replace coupon codes with cashback offers, way higher margin for the brand, lets the brand recoup the majority of the amount that they normally give away in a discount code. And so all of these things, the three things I just listed, are like totally proprietary compared to what a brand can get using an all-in-one like Klaviyo or an all-in-one like Attentive, because those companies, they're just not focused on going like as deep as possible. And so I think that, for example, those three things, just sort of the latest off the top of my head, if we continue to ship innovations like that, and we continue to have a team that's like deeply knowledgeable about SMS compliance, about strategy best practices, then sure, maybe not every brand will want to work with us, because some marketers will be like, I prefer an all-in-one. But most brands who want to maximize the opportunity will want to work with us because they can't get that stuff anywhere else. Yeah. So for us, it's like on the business side, and for me and my co-founders, it's like, if there is opportunity for value differentiation, then we can continue to be a dedicated player. If there's no value differentiation, then the appeal of an all-in-one solution will win because of convenience, because of price. And so it's about having enough value differentiation to like outpace the perceived value of around all-in-one. That's something we talk about a lot.
Yeah, I mean, eventually everything gets commoditized, right? You know, like you guys can pay out with the technology for the first couple of years, and then your competitors get inspired by your technology. And,
totally. Yeah. It's like, in tech, we talk a lot about like, we're either in a bundling phase or an unbundling phase, like at any given moment. And like marketing channels got unbundled for a little while, right? There was like Klaviyo for email and Postscript for SMS, and now things are rebundling a little bit. And either they will rebundle or the unbundling will happen because people get just so much value from the siloed product.
Yeah, and I mean, perhaps the value is like that price point too, like where it's we only do SMS, but our costs are lower. You know, so when you start getting specific things, let's talk about like, all right, someone's been with Attentive or Emotive or Klaviyo for years. They want to switch to Postscript. What does that look like? Is it easy to port the phone numbers over? Are there compliance issues you have to worry about? Like, how does that happen? And how do you kind of ensure that you're not working with a customer who just like scraped a bunch of phone numbers and say they have compliance and they don't really?
Yeah, it's great questions. So early on, when we learned more and more about the compliance field for SMS, we just sort of realized it had to be a core competency. And I'm talking back when it was just like me and Adam and Colin, and we were a tiny little just co-founder only business. And so now what that looks like is just like we were talking about on the investment and legal resources side, we also have made pretty meaningful investments in carrier operations, messaging operations, and customer compliance. And so what that means is, for a brand to move to Postscript, which is something we do all day long, we work with them and we work with the telephone providers to coordinate the exact time when there's going to be a changeover in their phone number, right? Because we want people to keep the same phone number they've had, but just move to Postscript. And so that's a pretty simple thing that we coordinate with them on. And then on the compliance side, during onboarding, we will audit their list and we will audit all the sources of opt-in that they were like generating lists from to ensure compliance. And we work with them on it. And if we find sources of opt-in that aren't up to the latest standards of compliant, then we will make recommendations to them to like carve out portions of their list. So we're like pretty hands-on there. And it's just one of those things that we've had to process and lean into. And so when someone migrates to us, right, normally they come through and they learn about some features that they wouldn't have access to, like this opt-in feature. They learn about some strategy advice or best practices that they didn't have access to. And they're like, great, I want to work with Postscript. And from there, the onboarding happens both in terms of strategy, like helping them build out at least the 80-20 best practices around SMS for growing their lists and marketing. And then also the compliance and messaging transition happens. So those are the things that go on. In general, it's like a couple-week process to migrate to Postscript from when someone agrees. Sometimes we do it in 3 days if someone's in a big rush, but normally it's a couple weeks.
Let's talk about marketing strategies and what you're seeing the most success from. Obviously, you kind of talked about the lifetime value and acquiring numbers, but like from a messaging standpoint or a creative standpoint, like how are the most successful brands rocking on SMS?
Yeah. So there's two answers here. One's the strategy and the other's the tone and the creative. So in terms of strategy, we really see that like brands who buy into the idea of subscriber LTV, they're the ones who win, which means working on growing your list as fast as you can, ensuring you have best practices for list growth. And then you're ensuring you're monitoring LTV. And how you monitor LTV is you look at unsubscribe rates, you look at messages per subscriber, and you look at revenue per message, because those are the levers you have to increase LTV or decrease LTV. So for example, if you're seeing revenue per message fall off a cliff, maybe it's time to like lessen the amount of messages you're sending out. But the inverse of that is if unsubscribe rates are low and revenue per message is high, maybe you can send more, which would just increase LTV of that cohort. So that's on the strategy side. Those are the right levers to pull, is how many messages per subscriber they're receiving on a monthly basis, monitoring unsubscribe rates, and revenue per message. How much is the creative and the actual tactics performing? That's the framework. In terms of tone, by far and away, if the brand has room to be conversational, that is the best approach on SMS. So it needs to be reflective of the brand voice, of course, but if a brand has an opportunity to have two-way interactions, to use a brand voice that feels like it's coming from a human or from a founder, we see that perform best. We see that perform better than 10% off, click here, 10% off, click here, 10% off, click here. That's kind of like a push notification, but this is a two-way channel. People are used to engaging over text messages in a two-way format. And if the brand can find a way that's on brand to lean in there, they will see lower unsubscribe rates, higher click-through rates, and probably higher revenue.
So let's go back to that strategic aspect. I'm curious how frequently, and I know the answer is like, it depends. Like,
yeah, sure.
You have to look at your metrics and make adjustments to it as you see it.
Yep.
But what is a general, like starting on day number one, how many SMS messages should I send out a month? And, like what kind of unsubscribe rate should I be expecting? And then, what kind of like conversion rates, stuff like that. Just kind of like, what do they call that? Benchmarks that they should hope to start around.
Sure. So for, let me pull up the SLTV benchmarks. So if anyone's interested in diving in, Google subscriber LTV benchmarks, go to Postscript. That'll like totally hook you up. So as far as how I think about this, the answer is it does depend how many messages they should get. But I think about it depends more in terms of the brand's merchandising calendar and what their product selection looks like. So for example, there are apparel brands who send 20 to 30 messages a month because it's an apparel brand. There's like new things coming out all the time. There's new collections to highlight all the time. It's such high SKU count that makes sense and isn't like disrespectful to the user, and they want to browse and they want to catch stuff. That's cool. That's not really mainstream. I think apparel and high SKU count is a little bit of an exception. What's more in the mainstream is 6 to 12 messages per month going out. And that isn't just campaigns. That includes automation flows people would be in. So you don't want people to be in like a 5-message welcome series and get 6 campaigns from you a month or 8 campaigns from you a month. But in that 6 to 12 range seems to be a sweet spot. And across a variety of different use cases. Hopefully it's personalized messages. Hopefully it's relevant things going out, right? Not the same 10% off each time. Instead, here's a new collection. Here's a piece of content. Here's a recommendation of like a pairing for us, a question that goes out just for engagement, things like that. So the 6 to 12 range is like the basic direction we point people in. And then we encourage them to look at their revenue per message and their retention rate to determine like if the number of messages is calibrated properly. Because if they're sending too much, revenue per message will come down, unsubscribe rate will go up. As far as benchmarks, so that 6 to 12 mark is pretty good for messages per subscriber per month. The other big number is acquisition rate, how fast your list is growing. So we want this to be over a 0.25. And what that means is that for every new subscriber you're adding at least one subscriber for every 4 orders that get placed on your site.
25%.
Ideally, that's much higher, but that is like the bare bones. And so we frame it in terms of orders because that's like a better showcase of volume than like revenue, for example. It's better and it's also more stable than traffic. So we want to at least like a 1-to-4 ratio of subscribers to orders getting placed on your site. But we see some people with a 1-to-1 ratio. We see some people at like a 2-to-1 ratio where they're really, really good at generating net new subscribers.
Yeah. So it's not just like new customers. That would be your total orders because you're going to be generating some people who aren't placing orders or aren't customers.
Correct.
Yeah.
And there's people who, there's businesses that are heavy with subscribers. There's businesses who have heavy repeat traffic. So it's a lot of people who aren't going to see the pop-up. And so this accounts for all of that. You want at least over a 1-to-4 ratio of subscribers per month to orders per month.
Where can people switch over to Postscript, find you guys online, follow you on Twitter?
So anyone can follow me at Ring My Beller. I'm around. I'm there to hang. I'm there for the hang. We're also Postscript.io on Twitter. That's cool as well. And people can find us at postscript.io. They can reach out to me anytime on Twitter or at alex@postscript.io. Love working with e-commerce marketers. I was an e-commerce marketer before starting Postscript, so it's my roots and happy to chat with anyone.
Sweet, guys. This has been another Ecommerce Conversations. I hope you guys enjoyed it as much as I did and learned a thing or two like I did. Cheers. Keep on growing.